Good afternoon, everyone. I think my own is when he talks about Africa, that's interesting. Thank you. It says African role in the world economy. I think this topic is of a very great importance considering the vast opportunities in Africa, which, if we're harnessed, will contribute immensely, not just to the Commonwealth, but globally. Today, despite what you can say, the vast potentials of Africa, Africa only contributes from WTO about 2 to 3% of the world trade. And of course, it's about 3% of the global GDP. If you compare Africa to other continents, you just see the difference. Even in per capita, which you use to measure poverty and everything, you'll find out that Africa is merely about 2,000 when you compare it to the nearest continent after that, which is Asia, at about $9,000. Despite that, Africa today is the second largest continent in terms of population of nearly 1.5 billion, but especially with the highest number of youth, or what you can call working age population of nearly 1 billion. No other continent like that. And of course, Africa has a huge, nearly 1,000 hectares of uncultivated arable land. Africa possesses about 30% of the global mineral resources. So you could see the potential of Africa. Yet, when you compare it with what is happening in terms of its contribution, so following the present disruption by Trump in some known and settled global economic orders, Africa stands at an opportunity to be able, in the new order, to be able to prosper, because you could say it missed out on the globalization that people are today celebrating. Africa wasn't part of it. But I believe that if we can organize ourselves, so people will always ask, what do you need to do to change that scenario? And what will Africa do to contribute in the global economy? I think that what is missing is leadership. Africa needs leaders that will prioritize productivity, especially in investing in critical areas of development, investing in education. If you have youthful population of about 1 billion, you need to invest in education and skill, because you could provide the workforce that is needed for productivity in Africa and the world. Africa needs to invest today in the world food market or productivity. Africa just contributes about approximately 300 billion, yet they have vast uncultivated land, which, if properly cultivated and given attention, could go up to 1 trillion. So Africa can actually be a net exporter of food and contributing to the world. People will always say to me, oh, how? And I always give them an example. Bangladesh today produces about almost 60 million tons of rice. And Bangladesh is just about 148,000 square kilometers of land in terms of land space. And with a 167 million population, they have, you can see, they hardly have the space. But a country like Nigeria, where I'm from, we have about 923,000 square kilometers, which means we have about over six times Bangladesh size, and yet we do not produce 10% of what they produce in rice. So you could see there's so much room for agricultural productivity. And if we can do that, not only will Africa be able to feed itself and become a net exporter, but if Africa moves to the next stage where they become more productive, especially in manufacturing and value added in their raw materials, you could see that immense potential clearly. We will contribute a lot in the new order after Trump in being a net exporter of finished goods, everything. And mineral resources is the same thing. If we manage the mineral resources very well, value added, you could see Africa contribute meaningfully to what will come after Trump disruption. So basically, Africa is positioned in what I can call the new order to become a place that would transform and contribute to the world in terms of global growth, global market supply, and everything. But first, it needs to invest in critical areas of development, which is education, health, invest in pulling people out of poverty, which you can fight using the models. So that's my little contribution this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obi. And now I'd like to welcome on our panellists for our final session of the day, which is focused on mitigation and adaptation. And if I could hand you over to our panellists and Paul, our chair. Thank you so much.
Come. Yeah, please. I'll take this one. Yeah, ideal. There's something really special about being at the Commonwealth. This is a real privilege, and following Mr. Obi and his excellent attire, I do feel a little bit like an ice cream salesman. We have had a really nice set of conversations in the past few days. We have spoken about 3 C's: the Commonwealth advantage, competitiveness. We have spoken about collaboration and the fact that we together are stronger, that the Commonwealth can bring us together. We are more similar than we are different. This is a panel about climate. With most of the population of the Commonwealth under 30, we have a particular need to be frank about the future. We've got an excellent panel here, and we're really looking forward to stimulating some thinking, having a little bit of fun, trialing and testing some ideas, showcasing some good practice, and really helping us understand how we can put climate action into the heart of trade and investment conversations. Most of us know the science. We know that increasing greenhouse gas has an impact by trapping more heat into planet Earth, and we know that indeed that has a consequence on most of our planetary systems. It poses some unwanted threats and opportunities for our economies, and indeed ultimately affects sea level rise and species it affects our food, and it affects even human health risks. Today's concentrations of atmospheric carbon dioxide are higher than they have been in 3 million years. It's truth. That's quite a long way back. And this really matters because actually our socio-economic systems are based on this period of climate stability. So everything that we do is based on an assumption and expectation that the climate is predictable and stable. And if that changes, it affects the way we think about value. It affects the way that we need to think about the economy. And a lack of action on climate could be worse than any tariff. Yesterday, there was a £10 fee for people mentioning tariff. But as I invite the panel just to introduce themselves, I'll encourage them to avoid jargon, because there's plenty of jargon within the climate space, but also to try to steer us away from the word tariff. So please, Amal-Lee, I'll just invite you all to introduce yourselves.
Okay. Hello, thank you. My name is Amin. I'm Managing Director for Climate, our Gender and Diversity, and also our Technical Assistance Advisory teams at British International Investment. We were formerly known as CDC and formerly the Commonwealth Development Corporation, so the UK government's development finance institution and impact investor. And in fact, I think the oldest DFI, because we are, I think, 77 years old this year. So pleased to be here.
Welcome.
Thanks. My name is Daniel Hooft. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called KelpBlue. And I guess the whole climate story is quite a personal one. I spent 20 years with Shell in Nigeria and Russia and various other places. So doing my best to produce carbon dioxide as efficiently as possible. And about 5 years ago, stopped doing that and set up the company, which is engaged in growing giant kelp, which draws down a lot of carbon and boosts a lot of biodiversity in oceans. And giant kelps, for those who don't know them, are seaweeds which are as tall and taller than this room and form these immense canopies. And we then harvest those canopies and turn them into agricultural inputs. So a lot of what Mr. Obi was just saying around value add in Africa and doing things that are around nature positive and the food system and the health of our soils are all wrapped into the theme. So that's the sort of the for-profit entity, and then we've got two not-for-profits, one that is engaged, called the Kelp Forest Foundation, which is engaged in the science of carbon cycles and carbon pathways in the ocean, as well as biodiversity boost in the ocean, so quantifying these ecosystem services. And in practice, what we do is we fund Namibian students in the University of Namibia, but sitting under supervisors in Cambridge or Plymouth or Otago University, so specialists from top institutions around the planet to create this network, so a center of excellence in Namibia that is connected very closely to top institutions around the planet. And then the third not-for-profit entity is a not-for-profit called the Blue School, which is at the moment a local school in our town where we operate in Namibia, but with a vision to create a whole network of blue schools around the Commonwealth, oceans-facing schools using the ocean as a real but also a symbolic connector between children in different places, global north, global south, people from different backgrounds, getting a lot of cross-fertilization to hopefully create a network of leaders for the future who see the world as one big pulsing Commonwealth rather than through the lens of their small sort of local perspective.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jasandra Nyker. I'm the managing partner of a company called Saja Climate Partners. I've spent the last 20 years of my career in the climate space, either in the clean power generation or climate tech investing areas. Saja Climate Partners focuses on providing investment and advisory services for companies within the global south, so slightly broader than just the Commonwealth, with an emphasis on looking at technology transfer and investment opportunities that relate to that within East and, should I say, Asia and Africa predominantly.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hassen, Bali, I'm co-founder of Ion Ventures. We're a renewable energy platform, essentially taking advantage of all of the fantastic technology developments in the solar and storage sector and finding ways to channel that into operational projects with a core focus here in the UK and Ireland, but seeing how that can be transferred into international markets, particularly in the ASEAN region. And it's applicable to archipelagos and island states as well as more mainland-oriented countries. And the challenge that we address is how do you develop high-quality projects that can bridge the gap to finance, and from that secure bankable, insurable projects that can deliver energy at any level of the requirement, from lower level energy access all the way up to grid connected utility scale assets that deliver into a broader country's energy strategy.
Perfect. 4 big experts in this area and 4 contrasting opinions. And of course, the tendency when we talk about climate is just to focus in on energy. We've had quite a lot of conversations about energy, but actually it must be much broader. And we're really lucky that actually we can talk about oceans and sustainable ocean health, because actually most of the planet is blue. So we can go back through the panel and we can just explore what do we think the big trends in the next 5 years will be, and recognizing that your world is kind of changing quite quickly. So Amal-Lee.
Yeah, thank you. So at BII, we're actually now in the 5th year of our climate strategy, where we've committed to be aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So committed to ensuring all of our investments are consistent with supporting countries' pathways to net zero and climate resilient development, net zero by 2050. And I think, as you're right, I mean, obviously the energy sector is key because it's key to decarbonising other sectors. So we do invest a lot in renewables, but also increasingly in battery storage systems, transmission, distribution, particularly sort of mini grids, which we're seeing particularly in a number of countries in Africa, in Nigeria, DRC, where the transmission network won't reach. But we're also working in other sectors, so looking to invest more in green manufacturing, particularly as part of the sort of value add agenda in Africa, as well as in sustainable food systems, in the water sector. And of course, in many of these, we look at how to help bring more low carbon or decarbonized solutions, but also increasingly the resilience to changing climate as well, which, as we know, we're already seeing in all regions of the world, but particularly where we invest, which is Africa and Asia, a number of threats, whether it's flooding, severe heat, heat stress. So really looking at how we can invest in those more innovative solutions. And that can range from venture capital, where we actually have a lot of, we've developed a new strategy, and we use often concessional blended finance to support these early stage companies that are bringing really innovative solutions, often in the climate tech space, linked to fintech, harnessing AI, artificial intelligence, particularly in ag tech, which is a really important area for helping to provide resilient services and technologies for farmers, including for smallholder farmers. So that's where we've been doing a lot in recent years. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of innovation coming out of India, but also we're seeing in parts of Africa, particularly in Kenya, Nigeria. And so what we're really keen to see is how we can take that across the continent. We also, I think, another sort of, ranging from venture capital to investing in bigger corporates, like manufacturing companies, how we can help them decarbonize their supply chains and value chains, to project finance. And then also working with banks. So we do a lot of financing through banks, as well as supporting banks with equity investment, but also I think what is really important that we're really seeing as Nesso is helping to bring also advisory, technical assistance to build the capacity of those banks to start to provide more innovative finance as well. And a couple of areas that we've been quite focused on in recent years is helping banks themselves issue green bonds. So NMB Bank in Tanzania, where we worked with them, also with FSD Africa, to build their capacity around issuing a green bond, which was actually then recently listed on the London Stock Exchange. So Tanzania's first bond issued here in London. So, you know, I mean, as I say, ranging from early stage, very risky investments to working with banks to help them do a lot more. And, you know, it's very much and perhaps we'll come on to this in a bit, but, you know, as I say, the focus has typically moved from the sort of focus on decarbonisation and renewables to recognising the urgency of bringing more investments into adaptation and resilience. And that's a big priority for us at the moment.
Yeah, and the debate is moving, of course. So Jasandra, can we invite you just to say a little bit about how you're working up and down the value chain and some of these blended financing instruments which are emerging?
Sure. So in terms of what we're looking at, it is very much related to climate technology and looking at enhancements. And I think the easiest way to describe this is if you think of the energy landscape, you think of it in terms of demand and you think of it in terms of supply. And there's opportunity for levers to be improved on both sides. With if you just think of the demographics of the world in terms of demand for energy, the ability to ensure that it becomes more efficient in terms of how we actually meet those needs is equally important as opposed to providing just a green solution. So as a result of which, we look at opportunity sets that come through in various sectors. And the key three areas of focus for us are e-mobility, and looking at predominantly more the 2- and 3-wheeler market, because that is the fastest part of growth in terms of mobility within the global south, and really looking at how that can be enhanced. So improvements around ranging of charging, so looking at 2- and 3-wheelers that can have battery swapping technologies that look at longer duration charging, for example, and bringing down that cost so that making it more cost effective for the end user from that perspective. We also spend a lot of time looking at opportunity sets within the water space, and particularly looking at water resilience and how to actually improve that. And then that filters into sectors such as the agricultural space, how to actually make sure that both your supply chain, so your feedstock, is actually more water resilient, but at the same time in ensuring how water is best used in order for you to have an improvement in crop yield. Just to give you...
Yeah. There's a narrative which says that most of those things are not really about climate at all, but they're very sensible strategic management decisions. And I think that's certainly something which is absolutely core to this conversation. It's not climate action in the stationery cupboard or the sustainability team, but it's about putting it into the heart of good organisational design and delivery. I used to work with the University of Cambridge for 11 years, and we indefinitely found that regardless of which industry companies were working in, we could always find, through the climate action lens, cost savings and innovation opportunities which were beneficial to the bottom line of the company, whilst at the same time helping them decarbonise and identify and secure new markets. And I think there's something really uplifting about that. And I always find, especially as a Yorkshireman, I always find it very difficult to think about climate change in a positive lens, but there's quite a lot going on. So Daniel, I'm going to come back to you. The blue economy is, of course, one of the most discussed areas of the climate action debate at the moment. And we know that we have 42% of coral reefs within the Commonwealth, and most of those are at risk. And we also know that there's significant untapped economic opportunities from the ocean. I just wondered, could you say a little bit more about how you're planning to scale and realise those activities in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think what sets the ocean apart from land in terms of how we use it is that on land it's been a very long time ago that we found ourselves, I think as humanity, forced to move from simply extracting to being more of a custodian, and we're still in that trajectory. I think there are still places where we do too much extraction and not enough custodianship, which is partly why we're in the mess we're in. But moving from sort of purely hunting and gathering to farming, which is a complex subject, of course, is an example of that. The oceans regenerate themselves so quickly, are so quick to reestablish life, that the temptation to keep taking more is perversely on the wrong side. And what you see, for example, in the North Sea with the sort of unintentional consequence of some of the North Sea, a very small amount of the North Sea being out of bounds because of wind turbines, is that suddenly you've got these places that are out of bounds for trawlers, and fish stocks can recover. And so fish stocks elsewhere in the North Sea are healthier because we have this, I don't know, 2 or 3% that isn't fished. And we see exactly the same in well-run marine protected areas of some Commonwealth countries, which is fairly recent, this realization that if you don't fish 10 or 20% of your waters, that the fish stocks in the remainder get much healthier. So, this is, I think the solution is obvious in terms of moving from being just the hunters to being custodians. And the blue ocean space, the blue economy, whatever that means, because it's quite a broad nomer, I think that's the key thing. Move to being a nature positive force and actually helping nature rebuild itself, which in the oceans it does extraordinarily rapidly. And the beauty is, you don't need to talk about a trade-off between profits or what humans can extract and nature as if it's always a zero-sum game. It's both. If we handle this properly, then nature will give us a lot more back that we need to feed ourselves, to drive economic growth, etc. And so that's really what the blue economy is about at the moment, one hopes. So in our narrow little example of kelp forestry, you provide carbon services, you provide biodiversity boost on quite an epic scale, quite a regional scale with a relatively small forest. You create a lot of jobs. They're meaningful jobs. They're long-term jobs. They range from blue-collar to white-collar, divers. Quite diverse jobs that we create that aren't going to go away because of a boom in either diamonds or oil or whatever the base resource is, because agricultural inputs are going to be required by humans till kingdom come, and seaweed extracts are some of the best agricultural inputs that we have in terms of improving crop yields, soil health, and improving profits and quality of outputs for farmers in the short and the long term. So we really have that trifecta of people, profits, planet, encapsulated within the project. The scale at which we can grow in Namibia is about 6,000 hectares, which doesn't sound like very much in a country where an average farm is probably 30,000 hectares. But 6,000 hectares is the biggest seaweed license on the planet at the moment, is sufficient to probably convert well over 1 million farms to full regenerative agriculture practices. So it's already enormous in terms of potential. Our ambition is to expand this to Alaska, New Zealand, Chile, Falklands. There's a number of countries that we're looking at and already sort of slowly active in expanding both the business and the academic not-for-profit and the schooling not-for-profit. So they all travel in a sort of, in a flock, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think we've spoken a little bit about collaboration, but Kev, that's an interesting kind of configuration that you have in order to move forward. We've also spoken in the past 36 hours a lot about risk. And I guess, Hassen, maybe we can come to you and just, could you share with us some views about how people are de-risking some of their activities, and then we'll come to explore what that means in the ocean environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can mainly speak from the point of view of developing energy projects, but I think it encapsulates varying aspects of the risks that have been spoken about through the event, not least actual delivery risk, insurance, financing risk, and obviously the final one, which is around climate and the impact of any kind of climate event that those projects would be exposed to. And I think looking at it from the bottom up, one of the challenges that we have as a developer is, everything is about problem solving, and it's problem solving in order to not just build a project that can work technically, because in reality that's quite straightforward. The technology is there, it's proven. I know people talk about innovation a lot. I've heard the word innovation a lot. As far as I'm concerned around renewables, the innovation is done. There's improvements that are going to be made and further optimization of what we already have. But the fact is, generation from solar and wind is proven at scale. I think it was a report today, renewables produced 40% of the world's power last year, which tells you that that's not an innovation technology, that is a everyday technology. Energy storage, particularly batteries, at scale, certainly in terms of large grid-connected energy storage, was an innovation product, but really it isn't, because everyone in this room has got a laptop or a mobile phone or both, and multiple other devices that use pretty much the same technology, and we've been relying on that for 25 plus years. And now we're just deploying it at scale onto grid-connected projects or vehicles and the like. So for me, that side of it has been de-risked. But you still need to know how to develop projects that use those technologies in the right way at a commercial advantage. And I think that's the area of risk that people should focus on, which is less about what is the core technology I'm adopting, because we can roll that out at scale already, but how do I integrate it into a framework that an investor would put capital against, that an insurer would underwrite, and that in the event of an incident, most likely a climate incident or something like that, how resilient and redundant is it? And a lot of that comes down to design principles, and I think also ensuring that the engineering focus is very key. A lot of what's happened historically has been done in a rush. And I mean that in the best sense, because if you look at tariff regimes and various other subsidies, they always have an end date. And so people building to end dates tend to do things quickly and sometimes cut corners. And the UK is a good example of that. We've got a huge rollout of renewables that happened all the way through the subsidy regimes. But a lot of those projects were not of high quality because they were built through British winter, which for anyone who knows about those is not the best time to be in fields constructing stuff. And a lot of them subsequently had technical and operational problems. So my view on this is actually, if you build to a higher standard, you set minimum thresholds in terms of build quality, making sure that the site has been designed with climate change in mind. You fitting into a commercial framework where you've got an offtake that will ensure that they use that power, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a bilateral government PPA, in my view. Lots of people want that, but I think that if you look at local communities, and certainly in some of the more remote parts of the Commonwealth, where transmission infrastructure is hard to come by or going to take many years to build, you want to build decentralized systems that are local, that are sized according to how that local community will use that power. And once they've had electrification or access to energy that's reliable and lower cost, well, they'll keep paying for it, and demand will grow, and so your return on that investment should be baked in. So my view on a lot of this is about how do we then, both as developers and producers of these types of assets, build high quality, develop high quality, but how do we also educate the investors themselves and the insurance community that these projects are commensurate with the kind of risk profile that they're willing to divert capital into. And I think, the net benefit of that should be clear, but I think it needs a little bit more involvement from the finance institutions to appreciate how certainly distributed, decentralized power is highly valuable, and we build from the bottom up. It doesn't just have to be super projects top down. And this stuff can be deployed quickly, and it can be fixed quickly if it has problems. And from there, I think that for me would be a solid way of looking at that risk profile. And the more you can do of that, the scale soon builds up, and actually at that point, it's a normal risk profile, and we have fewer conversations about the need to do new or innovative things, because again, in my view, we have the building blocks already, and we just need to use them.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And Jasandra, just before lunch, we were having a conversation about urban development, and we were talking a little bit about the need for specifying the right design spec and working with people in order to make sure that the projects that we're building are actually given the best possible chance of success. And I know that my local lived experience is that we just invested quite a lot of money in building a new train station, and when the first heavy rain came, of course everything flooded. And you think, this isn't about climate action, this is about sense, and it's about the context in which we're living. And I wondered, Jasandra, can we come to you just to talk a little bit about the role that investors and policy makers can do to accelerate the way that climate is coming into value chains?
Okay. In that regard, I would say that the role of investors, you do have to look at the entire risk profile. So as an investor looking at any opportunity, more and more so, we are looking at the concept around climate risk and what does it actually mean. And I'll give you a good example. We recently built one of the larger batteries here in Europe and one of my previous companies. And one of the things that we did not really think about earlier on, but had to retrofit in order to do so, was around flood risk. And you think that you're in a 1 in 300 year flood area, that it's not going to happen to you, but actually it does. And more so now, given the erratic behavior that we have from a climate perspective, you do need to take those things into consideration. So you actually have to build the resilience in. It does result in a higher level of capex for your particular investments, but it is actually necessary in order to do so. I think from a policymaker perspective, as we think about investing in climate tech, we do need to ensure that we have the ability to create efficient and conducive environments. And let me talk to the efficiency side first and why I think that is really important. Let's take the issues around permitting, whether it is for a renewable energy project or whether it's for something that we're trying to do in the mobility space. The rate at which we regulate and permit needs to be done more at a much faster way and in a more intelligent way. And 9 out of 10 times, that often is something that is delayed and cannot be controlled. And I think when we think policymakers, they need to think through how quickly can we do this. And I like to take the examples of what has been happening in Morocco and also in the GCC region, where permitting and the ability to actually step up is happening at a much faster rate with the use of technology. And similarly, I think the same needs to happen from a policymaker perspective in other regions, particularly in the global south. If I think about it from an investor perspective, and how do you, when you bring in multiple investors into a particular project, how do you have the ability to ensure that they actually work much faster? There's been, I think, urban legends around the DFI environment taking 200 to 300 days to complete due diligence. So how can that happen at a much faster rate? And maybe there are opportunities where banks and investors can actually come together and make that due diligence process much faster and more effective, relying on each other to the extent that they have the ability to do so, in order to reduce that due diligence timeline, in order to reduce the investment cycle, in order to actually make the investment.
Yeah, it brings us back to that concept of collaboration and actually using climate and working together through that lens to mitigate risk. Amal-Lee, do you have reflections and thoughts?
Yeah, I think, everything that my panelists have said, I think these are exactly the sorts of investments and opportunities we're looking at. I think for us, because we are very focused on development, job creation is a really important part of this as well. And as we look to invest, I think, we're seeing that a lot of these new types of innovation technologies, they can, alongside the services that they're delivering, it's really important to also ensure that we can help train people and bring along those that can benefit from those jobs. And in particular, we have, in addition to having a climate target, we have set ourselves a climate finance target, but we also have one for gender, to look at how we can invest more in either companies that are owned by women, entrepreneurs, or bigger companies which have senior women represented, but also critically how they employ women. So that's very much part of, as we've been looking at this as well. So for example, in India, we invested in a big it's a joint venture with a big Indian electric vehicle manufacturing company. And as part of that, we've been working with them to encourage more women, both in senior and also in other sort of junior roles in working within that company. And the company employs around 8,000 people. I think currently around 25% are women. But very importantly, we're also looking to do more recruitment, so going to women engineering schools. But another area is ensuring a more inclusive working environment, providing, maternity leave, all the sorts of activities and support that is needed to enable women to really rise into senior roles in these companies. So I think that's going to be really important. So bringing the finance, bringing the investment, but also recognizing the need to upskill people, and particularly, as I say, we really prioritize that for women.
Yeah, and I think that returns to some of the themes from yesterday as well, which I think is really important. And I guess one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is actually how do we pull greenhouse gas from the atmosphere? And Kev, we know that the atmospheric concentrations, as I said, are higher than they have been in 3 million years. And what does that really mean in terms of the net zero targets? And we know that potentially we have the need for industrial scale innovation to pull greenhouse gas through the way that we think about agriculture, the way that we deploy technologies, the way that we work with the ocean. And I struggle sometimes, my fourth C, having had collaboration, competitiveness, and climate, my fourth C is conflict. And I'm always in conflict between all this good work which is going on and the potential for good jobs and opportunities for women, with this sense that we're just not doing quite enough. And I just wondered, Hassen, can I come to you to offer some reflections in terms of what we might need to do in order to scale or accelerate our progress on the climate agenda?
Yeah, I mean, I think in part, feeling a sense of not doing enough is probably a good sentiment to maintain, because at least we then strive to do more. I think complacency is the last thing we need at the current time. But I also think that there can be a fuller embracing of some of the tools that we have at our disposal already, and to really get behind them and to do so at scale. Because, and again, I have worked in the carbon market sort of 15 years ago, and a lot of the sort of time and attention that was given to land use, whether reforestation or avoided deforestation, and I see a lot of those really politically centric conversations are still going with no real sense of conclusion and no real price on carbon that everyone can kind of get behind with a level of kind of provenance. But I think those are all necessary and net positive things for people to be doing in terms of managing land more effectively and doing what we can to preserve natural environments. But I also think if you look at the actual contribution to emissions, the rate of rollout of certain technologies like solar, if you look back over the last 10 or 15 reports from the IEA on their annual projection for the deployment of solar, they've been wrong every time. And that concept of exponential growth, exponential change is quite hard to get your head around, but it is possible. And solar is doing that. And actually, if you then come back to the concept of electrification of everything, which is a catch-all term, but you can do quite a lot if you can electrify with green electrons to alleviate the emissions that we've got. So actually, can you take a huge leap forward in terms of cutting off the amount that we're emitting? Not to negate the need to remove what's already in the atmosphere, but certainly to the extent of being able to really slow down what we are emitting today and adding to that problem. And my sense is that, you know, there's an awful lot of structure, policy, and for the right reasons, that these frameworks have formed over many decades or centuries. But I think that for me, a lot of innovation needs to focus on those as opposed to technology. Because the reality is, we have good technology that can make a huge dent in that problem. But what we want to do is to remove the barriers that prevent lots of people from getting behind it today. And for me, I would point the innovation requirement more to those frameworks. And how we do it sensibly, you know, we can't leave people behind. We've got to make sure that people have opportunity around it. But I do think that we can harness tools more sensibly if we can adjust some of the regulatory framework and get people as focused on scrutinizing that as they are on scrutinizing whether a new technology is valid. Because I go back 10, 15 years, and the rationale for renewables was great technology, not proven at scale, not cost effective enough, but the moment it is, we'll be doing it. And I still find people finding reasons to not do it, despite having checkboxed all of that criteria. So how about we find reasons to do it? That would be my take.
Yeah. And do you have a specific example where people have reframed the issue in order to give themselves permission to do something differently?
As in to deploy the technology?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think if you're lucky enough to engage with people on an interpersonal level, you can often realise that. And I think you know, for me, you know, the archetypal scenario that we had, it didn't quite work out, but because of a change of government in Bangladesh. But over a period of 3 years, we were working very closely with the Power Board and the Energy Minister to talk about the role of storage and how it could enable a huge improvement in energy access in parts of the country that had curtailment and brownouts. And it took a long time to demonstrate to them how and why this was relevant. But in the end, they were on the verge of accepting that there would be cause or rationale to deploy a large battery project in one region, which was suffering about $100 million per annum of economic loss because they had curtailment most days of the week. And it would be 10 to 12 years before transmission infrastructure could be added that would allow for the existing gas generation fleet to put power into that region. Whereas by using storage in the region, there would have been a very clear opportunity to locally manage that and alleviate those economic downsides. So, yeah, that was a change of thinking that took several years. Unfortunately, we couldn't deploy the project before there was a change of government, but the opportunity is still there and needed. And you know, we'll maintain that dialogue to see if we can get that done at some point in the future.
Yeah, I think there's something really powerful about kind of people asking different questions and engaging with others in their organisation to move forward. Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, renewables, I think, is a great example, and you referred to it as well. This is the obvious thing that's actually happening behind the scenes, and people still question it, the numbers, etc. I think people always overestimate what happens in 1 year and underestimate what we do in a decade, and the renewables is a great example of that. In my world, both when I was at Shell and now, the most obvious thing that you're always doing when you have some capital is changing from a hydrocarbon energy system to a renewable system, because it just makes economic sense. Mm-hmm. However, if I want to power my factory at the moment with additional power to be more independent of the grid, etc., doing so with a gas-fired system requires no paperwork whatsoever. But if I want to install renewable capacity, there's all sorts of hoops I need to go through, and it might take me 18 months to get permission. And there are some technical reasons for this because of the intermittency in the grid, but frankly, you know, that's the world on its head. You should have regulators enabling this, if necessary, with a sandbox approach till they get the regulation right, but not creating barriers to what is the direction of travel that is both common sense, better for value-adding country, and better for the planet. So I think on the whole, when we talk climate, I think people and individual companies largely are doing the right things because it's common sense, because as soon as you have the space to think a bit more long-term, it's what you want to do anyway. Sometimes it is marginally still more expensive, or you're told so, or your fear factor is played on, but it's still the right thing to do for the next generation. And I don't mean 25 years later, I mean the people who follow directly after you in your role. But in the big picture, I think we still persist as a globe to look at this in the wrong way, and perhaps our sort of carbon credit framework is to blame for this. So if I may, I'd like to make an analogy with a social housing project in Southern Africa. It's irrelevant which city it was in, but it was a sort of brutalist concrete donut building in which people, when waste management didn't run as well as it had before, and people started dumping all their waste in the inside of this building. And I think it was, if I'm not right, the waste had piled up to the 9th floor because before this was addressed. And so what do you do in that case when your waste problem is literally coming in through the apartment? You address it by producing less waste and by paying for removal of waste. And the greenhouse gas problem, which is one part of climate, I see it as very interconnected with our biodiversity crisis, and it's a lot bigger than just carbon. But carbon is the easiest component to tackle, is really just a waste problem. We've been using the sky as an open sewer. It's invisible. It's also across borders, which makes it sort of, why should I spend money if my neighbor benefits? So the classic sort of tragedy of the commons. But it still is a waste problem. And you don't deal with waste problems by telling the people on the 10th floor or the 15th floor, who tend to be richer than the ones on lower floors, if you feel like doing some voluntary work on behalf of the people who are under the waste down there, and this is global north, global south, then you can, with this mechanism that is really complicated and what are we doing here? It's a waste problem. Stop producing waste, and what you produce, remove in as efficient a way as possible. And I say that being basically a company who are nothing other than garbage removal people. We're the cleaning maids who try and mop up some of the mess. So I think in a way maybe carbon credit markets are the wrong answer, and perhaps the best thing the planet could do is to rip that up and think of something a little less voluntary.
Yeah. Amal-Lee, this is firmly into your space. You've been at the forefront of doing a lot of thinking about climate finance.
Yeah, no, I've done a lot of, thinking, but practicing in building the climate finance architecture, but also deploying climate finance. I must admit, I've never been closely involved in carbon markets. I've tended to come at this from the point of view, as other panelists have said, look, the technology's there. How do we overcome barriers to deploying those technologies? How do we scale? How do we replicate those successful business models? And really, really look to accelerate this. I think, so I'm not going to comment on carbon markets because that's not really where I've spent a lot of my time, but I fully agree. I think we are at a point where most of these technologies that we need, particularly over the next 10 years, already exist, but they're not yet being deployed at scale. And that's partly a financing challenge, high capital costs of some of these technologies, maybe very low running costs. But I would say the biggest barrier, probably I would see at this point, is the lack of the enabling policy and regulatory context that may be favoring the older technologies, which in many cases are very inefficient, producing pollution that creates a whole load of other problems, and not just CO2, but obviously other types of pollution. into water, as well as, local air quality. So, I think, and that's really a role for governments, and I think governments collaborating with other governments to actually put in place those measures that can really unlock the technologies that do exist. And I think the financial sector is moving. We've seen a lot of, from these really big investors who say that they are committed to being net zero. But at the same time, if countries are not changing, the economies are not changing, those investors will not be able to invest in assets that are consistent with a net zero. So, I feel we're at a sort of really quite critical point of time where there's so much potential now to unlock the innovation and technology that already exists.
Yeah. Jasandra?
Yeah, so I'd like to use a case study, if I may, in terms of how we should think about this differently. And climate's got a bad name at the moment. The word climate has a bad name, okay? It is where we are in our society, and you need to then think about it, well, what could one do differently? And I'm going to use the example of Indonesia, one of the largest countries in the world, fastest growing population, fastest growing middle class at this point in time, one of the highest emitters in the world. But they're not going to move away from coal immediately. And as much as there's been that pressure for them to move away from coal, they decided to take the climate issue and think about it differently. And one of the things that they thought through is, well, why don't we produce a very low-cost, high-efficient air conditioner, which they've actually done. And it actually has resulted in a very low emissions from this air conditioner. And as a result of which, they've been able to deploy it at scale because it's cheap, it's efficient, people want to buy it, but indirectly, they're solving for the greenhouse gas problem. And because it is cheap, it's cost effective, it is also profitable, people aren't thinking about it as being a climate solution, but it's actually an economically viable solution to a problem. And I think more and more we need to think about our solutions and our offerings from that perspective, because I think then the ramp up in terms of what we are having in order to reduce the GHG issue actually becomes more realistic and actually more attractive to investors, but also to regulators as well. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think we've got a massive branding problem. I think it's a real challenge in the climate space, and I think we're touching on a whole host of things which are really about performance and about opportunity and innovation and technology and improving the quality of people's lives. And I'll come back to you, if I may, Amal-Lee. Mm-hmm. What are the unlocks for finance? So we've touched a little bit on the fact that they're moving into this direction, but what are the big opportunities do you see?
You mean in types of technologies, investments?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it spans from, we've talked quite a bit about the energy sector. I know there was discussion previously about that. As, I think Hassen said, I mean, we see, solar has been coming down exponentially, similarly battery storage. And I think particularly as you start to develop smarter grid systems, which can also incorporate mini grids, actually virtual grids. I mean, there's huge sort of innovation in that respect, so that you can move to more virtual controlled grid infrastructure that can start to bring in much more sort of innovative types of not just providing electricity, but also on the demand side, how you're using that. So I think across the energy sector, there's clearly a lot. But I would also say, very importantly, is as we think about, and this is an area I'm very focused on, when we think about adaptation, resilience in particular, that's where I think the use of artificial intelligence becomes really, potentially a really big driver, because you can start to better integrate sort of climate scenarios, take quite complex data to process that to produce user-friendly solutions that can help, whether it's farmers, whether it's design in buildings, looking at sustainable cooling, harnessing that, I think, is going to be a really big driver. I know we look also at the challenges that come, because artificial intelligence is also very energy intensive, and so that's contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. But again, with renewables and battery systems, storage becoming more economic, then hopefully we can fully decarbonize the AI sector so that can also be harnessed for good, particularly in building adaptation and resilience.
Nice. And so we're coming towards the end of our session, and I wondered if we had a magic wand. Hassen, looking to you first, what would you most like from the audience in terms of progress in this space?
I think actually really, I was just thinking about the comments that everyone else has made up until this point. I think one of the really important things is lots of people look at what's new, and actually I think let's look at what we've learned, and let's be honest about what we've learned from real examples. And I look at the UK right now, where there are lots of elements of the energy transition in the UK that have been done incredibly well. Large deployment of renewables, large adoption of flexibility, demand-side management, and an open market where people can trade power, etc. But there are things that haven't worked. And I think the things that haven't worked are really the more pertinent points for people to adopt in how they then look at your own nations and across the Commonwealth for what kind of grid 2.0 looks like. And the reason I point to that is, at this point in time, the grid network in the UK is struggling to add more capacity, whether supply or demand. Hasn't adopted smart grid technology within the network operator itself. Parts of the grid that have been asked to connect their assets to the grid are smart, and they are driven by algorithmic trading strategies and various other sophisticated ways of producing revenue and managing when they're on and off. But the grid itself hasn't been deployed in that way. And therefore, I would look at the opportunity in lots of these countries to not just think about the suite of generation technologies or flexibility technologies like storage, but how do you adopt a grid model that is moving towards what grid 2.0 needs to be? And I think that would be my kind of ask, because that's about policy, it's about empowering the network operators and the grid owners to deploy a system that's fit for purpose. And I guess analogous to that probably is what happened in telecoms, where the Global South broadly missed fixed line telecoms in terms of mass adoption and went straight to mobile. And I think that that's something that the energy system can do, which is to go straight to a decentralized, not controlled by a government entity or under a clearly regulated pathway, but actually built in a decentralized fashion, which is more fit for purpose to align with the different technologies and solutions that we have today. So I think enabling that would be a really big positive outcome for me, and maybe a framework across Commonwealth countries that could support that would be a really good first step.
Yeah.
If I may, Paul, what I'm hearing from everybody is this sort of the decentralized, bespoke solutions, and I think there's quite an important theme in that. Like if you look at all the diversity of places that this audience come from, or think about it in terms of what people say about using indigenous knowledge in how we do things, and to me, I'm indigenous to the Netherlands, just like it isn't just limited to First Nations. We all have our deep traditions, and they've grown in a certain way for a reason. And so the way we eat or dress in Nigeria is because of reasons that aren't just to do with our aesthetics. They're to do with deep understanding and eventual knowledge around what works and what is most holistically sensible. And so I like to look at how we set up our business in terms of different returns. You look at the return on social capital, and you look at that as a business, as a long-term business. You don't just do that out of altruism, you also do it because it makes your business stronger if your people and your neighbors are supporters of what you're doing. It makes it more robust against risk. Climate is one, but there are all sorts of risks that you become more robust against if your means of behaving within your company, with your people, and with the people that you operate amongst is seen as positive. Just like that, your return on natural capital is something that you don't just do because you're green or because you're an idealist. You do it because if you treat nature well, that will protect you against the risks. So it's a robustness thing. Financial capital isn't just something we do because we're greedy. We do it in order to have robust buffers of capital for when black swans arrive and things happen that we don't want. Return on inspiration, which is the fourth one we use, is less tangible. We can't catch it in a KPI, maybe thankfully, but also makes you robust. When people are passionate about what they're doing and people around see what you're doing and are supportive of the concept and the elegance of it, that makes you robust. And so if there would be one thing I would want this room to do is in whichever capacity you're in, I think a lot of people are in policy making or advocacy or regulatory type environments. And each project that you get, what you want is a green discount. Or you don't want things that are good for the environment or good for social or for nature, but more expensive. You want things like the air conditioners you were talking about, which work for the context that they're in and are cheaper and are cleaner. Mm-hmm. Then you're really tackling all things at the same time. And we need to move away from the idea that if you want to do something that's nature positive, you'll have to accept lower profits. We reject that. As soon as we run into that, we say we must start again. We haven't looked at this problem in a deep, intelligent, thoughtful enough way. We have to come up with a solution where the best profits are always because you're getting best outcomes for nature, for social, and obviously, therefore, it's inspiring. And so, sorry to be a bit long-winded, but if we look at projects that come along, we don't need then additional capital, grants, subsidies. I think all we need is for regulators to recognize the potential of these projects and temporarily or ideally long-term remove the regulatory hurdles and barriers that stand in the way of doing new things. Because that's frankly what I see around me in the ecosystem in terms of people trying to mitigate, adapt, find new ways of doing business. Their biggest hurdle is always bureaucracy, which tends to be designed to repeat what's been gone before. And what's gone before in too many constructs, whether social, environmental, often even financial, is not working. So we need new things. We need to accelerate the pace at which we can try out new things. Then we need to be bold enough to remove the hurdles. Everybody wants hurdles removed, good projects and bad projects.
Yeah.
So what is a good project? It's a green discount project. It's a social discount project. And what I mean with the discount is that it's a smarter, better value for money solution, but that happens to also hit all sorts of other locally important contexts. Every place is different. The underlying problems are often similar, but they're very specific.
Yeah, and I think have that mentality and mindset is super important, and actually it's one of the things which is often hard for people leading organizations to really capture. Jasandra?
Yeah, I think my departing words, if I could say it, I would say, leverage the Commonwealth as a climate test bed. You've got urban areas, you've got varying economic diversity around this. The ability to test our technologies and existing technologies. I don't think we should reinvent the wheel. I think the Commonwealth provides a great ecosystem in terms of being able to do that, and we should leverage it more effectively.
Yeah, actually very similar, and I think recognizing, the huge resource that exists, particularly in Africa, in terms of solar, and how that can be a driver of green manufacturing through production of green hydrogen. The solar resources available can actually enable the region to become a real powerhouse, as we heard. So I think recognizing that. I also, I talked a lot about technology, but I also think recognizing the value, the real economic value, as well as also intrinsic value of nature as well, I think will also be key. I'm not sure I would totally deregulate. I think it's more like smarter regulation.
Smarter regulation.
Integrating nature into procurement, into different standards and codes, etc. I think will be increasingly important.
That's good. We've got the signal that we need to move on in just a moment. But you'll see that I hope we've made the case that climate action needs to be part of the trade and investment conversation, that there's huge opportunities for doing this, that there's a lot of expertise. We don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. It's not just about energy, because inherently we get sucked back into the energy conversation, but there's big opportunities that sit elsewhere. At the organisational, but also at the governmental level, there are opportunities. We're talking about some of the finance and some of the emerging flows. And we know that there's track record in terms of projects which work and projects which don't work. And I think there's something really integral to what we've touched on previously around the need for education and the need to think holistically, whether that's about our energy system, not just being production of electrons, but actually how they're circulated through the grid and how that grid is resilient against future demand from things like AI, how we incorporate those new innovations into the way that we're setting decisions, but also thinking about new market opportunities, not just different countries, but actually different asset classes. And I think Daniel's case for work in the blue economy is really fascinating. So I think that brings us towards the end. This is a really fascinating space. We've avoided acronyms, and hopefully we've given you a little bit of food for thought. There are untapped markets here, and there's certainly flows of finance. So thank you very much. I know it's the post-lunch slot, so we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to our fantastic speakers. And no, you're good. And it gives me now, we are going to go straight into our closing session. So if I could just ask you all to keep your seats for a couple of minutes. I am delighted to introduce our chairman, Lord Marland, to take us into the closing session. Thank you so much.
Shall I just have one of those? Is one of those working?
It is, but I'd rather use
I'd rather not. Just bear with me a second. Thank you. Felix, come on up. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Come on up, Felix. Now, here is one of the great champions of Cameroon, and also the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, the great minister himself, Felix Mbayu. I don't know what we'd do without you, Felix, really. You've been so generous and supportive of our organisation, and we love the Cameroon delegation always coming, which you lead. Would you mind saying a few words?
Thank you very much, Lord Marland. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Felix Mbayu. I'm the Minister in charge of relations with the Commonwealth. In Cameroon, when we talk about the Commonwealth, it's the name of an organization, but it's also for us a mission, an objective. How do you make the wealth common? How does the Commonwealth make the wealth common? And when you look at it from that perspective, then you would be able to situate the importance of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council. Because the Commonwealth family is made of so many organizations. You have the Commonwealth Telecoms Organization, the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, the Commonwealth Magistrates Association, the Commonwealth Lawyers Association. But all of them, the engine they need to grow is trade and investment. And that was what makes CWEIC a very important organization. And to imagine that Lord Marland and his team thought a few months ago to organize this meeting in April shows how visionary they are. Because indeed, we are meeting at a time when the world is facing challenges, serious challenges. At a time when the foundations of everything we knew in world trade and world investment, the financial architecture is being tested and challenged. What an opportunity for the Commonwealth to show what it's worth. Lord Malan, thank you. Visionaries, as I said yesterday, see opportunities where others see obstacles. And you have always shown, with the support of all of your staff, that you see opportunities where most do not. CWEIC is an organization born out of what we used to call the Commonwealth Business Council. You turned it into something which is not only alive, but something which is viable and which produces results. We have all been here today. We have discussed all the important issues which faces the Commonwealth in every area, and I followed the discussion, the last one on mitigation and adaptation. All of that, you need investments. The various countries presented their positions on many diverse issues. For all of that, you need trade and investments. My colleague, the Minister in charge of Economy and Plan yesterday, suggested that we should move from talking to action. And one of his proposals was that we should turn the Commonwealth advantage into real action. The common language, the 2.5 billion people in the Commonwealth, the young population, all of that are assets. Now that the world is facing a challenge to trade, why don't we think of creating the Commonwealth Trade Network? Why don't we think of creating the Commonwealth Trade and Investment Network? Commonwealth, through its convening power, Commonwealth, through its ability to bring diverse people together, can do that. The Commonwealth is one of the few organizations which has in its midst members of the Security Council of the United Nations, members of the G7, members of the G20. The Commonwealth is capable. The Commonwealth is willing. The Commonwealth is able. Let's just do it. Thank you very much, David.
Well, I'm very grateful for that advertisement on behalf of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council. Felix, thank you very much. You're a huge star, and I'm so grateful, as I said earlier, for everything you do. And of course, you've sponsored this event, which is fantastic, as has Jim Ovia from Zenith. If anyone from Zenith is still here after last night's party, well done. You've done very well. You've obviously recovered from the hangover. I think it's amazing that so many people who stayed in this room to the bitter end. Thank you very much indeed. I want to thank my team, led, as you know, by Rosie, but I just want to remind you of the key people who work for our team, who are in charge of our international network. And I can see Cham, where are you? I did see you a moment ago. Cham, who is Cameroon, with his great chairman, Auguste Pender, over there. Thank you for Cameroon. Now, everyone tells me the Maldives is a very nice place to go, and I can see the chairman of Maldives over there and his son, who is looks after the Maldives. So, yeah, tough place to go. I'm sorry about that. But if you happen to want to do business in the Maldives, there you are. Ben, can I see you? Stand up. There he is. Ghana. Ghana now an incredibly re-emerging market. And we heard from the Minister, and the Minister is very keen to come and do a roundtable this time next year and bring people to here. But if you want to do business in there, and there's Pride next to him, who, and Rashida, where's she? Anyone else from the team? Who else from the team? Radhika's there. Radhika, I can see you. Thank you very much. Stand up, Radhika. Or were you standing up? You are. Good. Anna, who looks after communications, you're there. Thank you, Anna. And Phyllis, who is our woman in Malta. Now, Malta's not a bad place to go. Phyllis, please. Did I see Sri Lanka anywhere? Oh, yes, I do. There you are. Sri Lanka. So, anyone else who I haven't mentioned, apart from obviously, where's Jared? Is he still here? Jared? Well, that's a black mark. He'll be fired. Oh, Eric? No, Eric's not here. Raymond is here, of course. You can't forget him from Singapore. Raymond, give us a wave. He is smiling, everybody. He doesn't normally smile. Oh, there he is. There is Mr. Nigeria at the back. Obina, thank you. So we've got to thank them for all the work they've done. Anyone I've missed from overseas? And then we've got, of course, Charlotte, Megan, Sean, Sarah Jane, Susanna. Anyone else have I missed? No. Oh, and of course, the volunteer team who've all come in. We're very grateful to you. But much more importantly, it's you who make this event so successful. It is an amazing opportunity we have out there, and Felix, you mentioned it a moment ago. We now have got a fantastic opportunity. CWEIC has a fantastic opportunity. This is just a springboard for changes. Already I've had people come up to me saying, I want to move my factory from Sri Lanka, so where I can have a 10% tariff. This they want to do now. Commonwealth businesses are on the move to react to these onerous tariffs that are being put on some of the emerging nations of the world. And we are at the heart of it. We're here to help. And oh, here is Jared. Where have you been, Jared? That's it. Jared, Gibraltar. A wonderful tax haven. We're all going to be moving there, by the way, if you're British. Cayman's the other one. Eric Bush isn't here, but you know, it's a toss-up between the two. Malta's not bad, Felix, by the way. So thank you all very much indeed. This is an incredible journey we're about to have, and I'm so glad you're going to be part of it. And we'll see you at our next event. Thanks very much.